All right, good evening, everyone. Hello, hello, hello. Welcome. I'll just give you all a couple minutes to grab your seats if we want to. And you okay? And get hit in the face with a microphone. That's kind of par for the course in this joint. All right. All right, everyone. Thank you for coming to City Lights this evening. Before we get the evening started, I just would like to take a moment to acknowledge that this event is taking place on the unceded ancestral homelands of the Ramaytush Ohlone people. We'd like to offer our respect to those who have come before us as stewards of the land and who are still here and continue to fight for an uncolonized future. So normally it's Peter Maravellis up here, but he couldn't be with us today because of health reasons. But I'm thrilled. My name is Caitlyn. For those of you who don't know me, I think I have seen at least every face in this room once or twice. But I'm thrilled to have the honor to be in Peter's stead this evening and hosting and celebrating this celebration of Jack's 90th birthday. Very few people in this room don't know Jack, but for anybody in the back and newly arriving on the scene, Jack Hirschman was a poet, translator, editor, activist, organizer, the list could go on for days, and former poet laureate of San Francisco. His powerfully eloquent voice set the tone for political poetry in this country. Since leaving a teaching career in the 60s, Hirschman took the free exchange of poetry and politics into the streets, where he was, in the words of poet Luke Breit, America's most important living poet. He is the author of numerous books of poetry, plus some 45 translations from half a dozen languages, as well as the editor of anthologies and journals. Among his many volumes of poetry are All That's Left, Endless Threshold, Frontlines, The Arcanes, and Lyripol. Jack departed this plane in August of 2021. While his physical presence is missed terribly, his legacy lives on through his poetry and the many lives he's touched and continues to fill rooms. We have a star-studded lineup of poets and musicians tonight to celebrate Jack. Some of them are still stuck in traffic, so if it seems like we're stalling for time, we are, and I apologize ahead of time. But Agneta Falk will be our host this evening. She is joined by Scott Bird, Dimitri Charalambou, Neeli Cherkovski, Mauro Ffortissimo, Celia Hirschman, Matt Gonzalez, Devorah Major, Menefee, Alejandro Murguia, and Byron Spooner. With no further ado, everyone, please give a warm welcome to the inimitable, I just stumbled over that word, didn't I? Artist, poet, and writer, Agneta Falk.
Hello. And also Manas Padian and also Jessica Lewis or some. Hello. Thank you for all being here. It's fantastic. I'm going to introduce the readers tonight. I'm not going to give a long biography. I think if they want to say something about themselves, they can. But we want the evening to proceed quickly because we have limited time here and we are continuing at specs later. So I would love to ask Dimitri Charalambou to come up first.
Hello. Jack's work from the beginning to now has a consistency of style and expression. For example, the poem he wrote when he was 20 years old in 1953 has similar style, form as his later poems as in the Arcanes. In 1953, he writes a poem after reading Dylan Thomas. It's this incredible poem after absorbing Dylan Thomas' work. When I met Jack in 1981, we collaborated in periodical called Compages, and we translated from every language imaginable. Jack was a believer in the international expression of poetry. Both languages were printed in Compages, and we read in public the original English translation. Jack was fond of the Greek language, which he regarded as the most balanced in terms of vowels and consonants. together collaborated in translations of Katerina Gogou, jazz poetry, Greek anthology, etc. For Dylan Thomas, written in 1953, I will read in Greek and English, translated by a friend called Christos Aggelakopoulos, who lives in Greece. And this is the this is the book that has been printed in Greece, and Jack also is recognized among the poets in Greece. Για τον Dylan Thomas, εκείνος ο άνεμος υδάτινων φωνιέντων που στροβιλίστηκε από το δικάωστα αυτού που θέρισε ένα κόσμο μουσικής, του λαιμού την άρπα και άγιασε τα ουράνια, μες στις σπηλιές του αυτιού, με αγκαλιάζει ακόμα, ρυπίζει με μουγκανιστή φλόγα το δυστυχισμένο αίμα και αντισταθμίζει την ελέγεια μέσα στην ολολίζουσα νύχτα. Εκείνη η γραφίδα που ξεπρόβαλε από την ποίηση θαλασσών μου τζούρωσε τους βίβλους ενός παιδιού πάνω στα σκουριασμένα φύλλα και τα έκαναμε να πετάξουν. Έσκησε την καλυμμένη αναρχία του σακατεμένου ήχου και της απόκριφης λέξης και κατάπιε άδειες γραφές με τον κατακλυσμό της ανάσατης. Εκείνο το θάνατο, την κατάρρευση του μυαλού, του στόμα που η έκρησή του άγιασε ελαιογράφημα, ενώ η παγερή βροχή του Νοεμβρίου χτυπούσε τη μοίρα καθόλου δε θρηνό, διότι στη φτώχεια των ημερών φουσκώνω από τις ηλεκτρωμένες οδές, από το στόμα της χοροδίας των κοδωνοκρουστών νεκρών. For Dylan Thomas. That wind of water vowels whirled from singing bones of him who reaped the world of music in the throat's harp and sainted heaven in the grottos of the ear, raptures me yet fans with bellowing flame the woe begone blood that and cancels elegy of morning band night. That pen sprang from the poetry of seas, has scrawled Bibles of a child on rusted leaves and made them fly, has slashed and curtained anarchy of crippled sound and cryptic words, and swallowed empty scriptures in the deluge of its breath. That death, the crumbling of a brain, the mouth whose issue made the stained glass holy, while cold November rain raped fate. I do not lament for the poverty of days. I am swollen by the full-blown cantus from the mouth of the choir of the bell-ringing dead. 1953. 20 years old, Jack. It's incredible that he has this poem.
Thank you, Dimitri. I was just about to be stupid and say that's all Greek to me, but Jack actually would have liked that very much because Jack always insisted on reading poems in the original language as well as the translation. So tonight, we have the great honor to have Celia here, who is Jack's daughter. So please welcome Celia Hirschman.
Thank you, Aggie. I want to say my mother, Ruth Hirschman, married Jack in 1954. And my brother David was born 2 years later in 56, and I was born in 58. And we lived together as a family until about 71. So this is a poem I wrote on the day of his death 2 years ago, August 22nd, 2021. He is the sun and the moon, the towering light in front of me, the one I've always adored. He makes being in the moment most fun. His fun, my fun. We always had fun together. Hitchhiking on Sunset Boulevard, me just 10, with his pool cue box in my hand. Him teaching me to do the It Happened One Night hitch. Everybody stopped to give us a ride. Touring, used bookstores, thrift stores in Hollywood. Once or twice, Jack and I would just roam LA because we could. It was a different kind of love affair, the kind that father and daughter could have, the kind that treasured each other. There was never a day where my father didn't want me near, and being with him was always different, inventive, wondrous, and alive. Jack saw me as a child as well, but I was someone he taught lessons about people and how you treat them, about justice and why it was important, about beauty being in the eye of the beholder. And I wasn't alone in love with Jack. Everybody he met loved him. He had a spirit that cut through the bullshit of daily living, bringing a big smile to people's faces. He was unforgettable. He was someone you wanted to meet again and again. And I got to. Over the last 30 years, he would ask me, when are you coming to San Francisco? And I came as much as I could. I knew the day would come when his light wouldn't be here anymore. And I weep for Aggie and Sarah and everyone who got close to this wondrous man, this giant redwood. And now that day has come. I only wish the greatest light for that beautiful spirit on and on wherever he goes, lighting up other spirits along the way. You are the sunshine of my life, Jack.
So beautiful that it makes me cry, but not going to cry. So I don't know if Devorah and everyone, Sarah saw she arrived, but meanwhile, I'm going to ask Byron Spooner to come up. Yeah, and Byron is going to be very explicit in what he's in the introduction anyway, because he's going to talk about your friendship and etc. So I need to say nothing.
Thank you. This is called The Last Time. I remember we were holding hands, just the two of us, his hand resting on top of mine, mine on his, then his on mine. I had seated myself on the chair next to him because he was alone there in his regular place at the big table, his back to the wall at Specs, a rare occasion indeed. He was generally surrounded by friends and others requiring his attention. Not that we never had time together, far from it, but usually not in public like this and never at Specs. We've been working together, Jack Hirschman and I, for 15 years at that point, and had become great friends. Like most men, especially old men like us, we didn't put much stock in intimate conversation, too old to waste time belly aching about our feelings and our regrets, our mistakes. We tended towards books, politics, friends, and culture. Oh, and baseball, and talking dog jokes, and staring off into the middle distance. Sometimes it seemed we were more comfortable with drifting off into silence than anything else. So Byron, he said in that deep baritone he always used to say my name, you're publishing a book, a lifetime ambition fulfilled. There was joy in his voice and some pride. Yeah, I said, this fall looks like, he said, you should be proud. 10 years, I said, though it had been longer than that. I could tell he was about to move on to something else. Maybe his baseball played with dice game. Each roll of the dice represented a particular play, which I suspected changed with his whims. Jack, wait a minute, I said. I got to tell you something. He raised an eyebrow. Listen, I want you to know how important you've been to that. Of course he did. He just a few days before given me a wonderful blurb for my forthcoming collection of stories. You, more than anyone else, with the exception of Judy, inspired me to do it, that it could be done, even you encouraged me to keep going. For example, the example you set for others, including me, was just invaluable. You made this possible. You made me think I could do it. Ah, he said, it was all you all the way. He waved off my sentiments with a flip of a hand. No, I said, I'm not going to let you get away with that. I want you to get how important you were. You helped me believe I could do it. I wanted him to see how hard it was for me to say what I was saying. He nodded and our eyes caught, his deep and patient and wise and old. He smiled and said, well, and looked down at our hands stacked there together on the table and patted my hand with his top hand. He looked back at me and said, thank you for that, Byron, but always remember that in the end, this was something you did, not me, not anyone else. That's as close as I can remember it anyway. Words to that effect. I have no idea what made either of us say any of this. It was not the way we normally spoke. Together, we pulled off three very complex international poetry festivals without exchanging so much as a high five, 6 citywide poetry competitions, countless poetry readings marked by nothing more than that was good and yeah. Now, he said, unstacking our hands and sitting back, relieved to be finally off the subject, how's Ulysses going? With his encouragement, I was taking yet another stab at Ulysses. He convinced me it was as readable as any other book. But I was making no more progress than I had on previous attempts. Even Jack's immense powers couldn't make it decipherable to me. I was not intellectual icebreaker enough to plow through. Fine, I said, slow. There's nothing wrong with that, my friend. Just read with the flow, follow the rhythms, the sounds. That's certainly no rush. It's best read aloud, by the way. I was also grappling with my own book, reading it for what seemed like the 100th time, proofing, editing, burnishing. It was no Ulysses, but I was still having trouble wrestling it to the ground. 10 days later, I sat at his bedside with Aggie and Judy, his lifeless body still with the covers tucked under his chin. In the kitchen, Rebecca and Francisco tried to restore order where there had been no disorder. We waited for the funeral guys to show up. I'd missed my father's death by a few hours. The fucking plane just took too long and never had a final moment with him. The moment the rest of the family had and had held on to. I remembered my last moments with Jack together there in Specs, our hands together, and how rare and precious that was and always will remain. I never did get all the way through Ulysses, but I will someday, and will complete another thing Jack and I started together. Thank you.
Thank you, Byron. Manas Padian, please. Welcome, Manas.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Well, I wasn't ready, but thank you so much, Aggie, for asking me to read. I'm a poet, painter, translator, and my first novel is going to be published next year. And I was, thank you. And I was so fortunate to do 2 projects with Jack. One was translation and one was the CD that we read Rumi. I read Farsi, he read English, and Celia published it. So I am going to read a poem that I wrote for him just a few days ago. And he really liked me when I read, especially in Farsi. So I'm going to say, Tavallodat Mubarak, Jack, means happy birthday, Jack. In San Francisco's heart, a legend stood. Jack Hirschman, the poet, misunderstood. Upon his 90th birthday, we gather round to celebrate a life where words abound. In North Beach's cafe, his verses flowed like wave upon the shore, a rhythmic ode. To the city's streets, its vibrant soul, Jack's poetry made San Francisco whole. With a twinkle in his eyes and a satirical smile, he had captured the city's essence mile by mile. From Coit Tower's height to the Golden Gate, in every stanza, his love would resonate. In bars and bookstores, he had held court, a modern-day troubadour, his words a fort for justice, equality, and the human rights. Jack's poems would always shine their lights through decades. The champions, the unheard, gave voice to those whose stories often blurred. A poet of the people, a beacon of hope. In his verse, we found strength to cope. As we gather here on this special day to honor Jack Hirschman in our own way, let's remember his legacy so profound. In the tapestry of San Francisco, he's forever found. True, though he may be gone, his spirit lives on. In the poems he wrote, in the battles he had done. Happy 90s, Jack, in the poet's sky. Your words continue to soar, never to die. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Manas. And now I'm going to ask Neeli Cherkovski. As I said before, I'm not going to do long introductions. They will let you know who they are.
I tested the light. I can't see, I can't hear, I can't walk. It's great. I took after Jack. I mean, we both ended up with no teeth and with the canes, and it was great. But we kept at it. You know, nobody, I was going to tell, I told it on his 80th birthday, I stood up here, same place, and told these 3 phone calls. And I thought so many people have heard it, but I guess I'll do it. First phone call, Jack would call me day after day. Hello, Neeli. This is Jack. Guess who died? I mean, he had it all. And, he would use a diminutive. It wasn't Ken who died. It was Kenny. Wonderful poet, Ken Wayne, and so many other people. It was the diminutive because that's the way Jack related to people. Second one, it's a little perverse. Hello, Neeli. This is Jack. The mayor called and appointed me poet laureate. How are you feeling? I said, well, Jack, I practiced a speech 35 times on Bernal Hill, but I'm very happy for you. He was my teacher. Jack Hirschman was my teacher. The third one was a little surprising to me, and I answer it in the poem I read. Hello, Neeli. This is Jack. What do you think of the Arcanes? Well, he never asked me anything like that. He was pretty guarded that way. He had so much confidence in what he did. I know when Lawrence put together Lyripol in the Pocket Poet series in '75, he had a little trouble with Jack because Lawrence Ferlinghetti had his own idea of what he wanted. And Jack, was just, he's here, and you're not going to move him, So for Jack Hirschman, 4 volumes of the Arcanes by Jack Hirschman, one on top of the other, color-coded, written in a cramped studio overlooking Columbus Avenue, and sometimes while hunched over on a plane heading for the Italian language or the Arabic whale. Your Arcanes are calling right next to us selected poems by Vladimir Mayakovsky, a Walt Whitman collection, 2 books by Charles Olson, Nightwood by Juna Barnes, the collected poems of Bobby Kaufman, and the stories of Ernest Hemingway. You and I read aloud from his visionary prose one afternoon in a meadow somewhere north of Petaluma. Come, Jack, come along, watch the hawks over the Mendocino headlands, 1975. You and I and our tribe from North Beach. You hinted even then of an endless poem to fall into your hands, something with archaic music, elegy, celebration, yeah, a street text. Jack, your arcanes are ancient and postmodern in such a way that I cannot ignore them. I'd never forgive myself if I didn't scan the pages and read those distinct and distant rumblings, memories, meditations, lyrical lights, juxtapositions. You really did come out of the Bronx. You really did flee Los Angeles after they kicked your ass out of the English department at UCLA for recommending draft resistance. Jim Morrison of the Doors, among them, Stephen Kessler, the incredible translator, Max Schwartz, feverish bohemian, and Steve Richman, renegade poet of LA. We first met in 1966. I was 21, you were 33. You looked like Antonin Artaud and declaimed like an ancient poet is supposed to, out of the sprawling lyrical arcade. So the written word was forever your native land. And what you spoke of, you spoke single letters. They stood like mastodons. Do you remember slamming the door on Bukowski and me when we knocked on it? And afterward, Bukowski said, Jack Hirschman just committed literary suicide. 55 years later, you were still going strong. You grew younger in the sound of your song as you became an elder bard. Translator, lover of Stalin's mustache, father for so many younger poets who wandered through town, illuminator of lost souls and of the homeless. Your idea of poetry was that it could save the plants, the animals, and human endeavor down to the end of a page of print or in a notebook waiting to be filled, or in the Cafe Trieste. In those primitive years, you and Bobby Kaufman and Lawrence Ferlinghetti, we could fill an auditorium with those who you influenced, guiding hand, gentle voice, and understanding heart. Old comrade.
Thank you, Neeli. That's brilliant. I continued the tradition, after Jack passed too. I would phone Neeli up and I said, hello, Neeli. Did you pay for the last arcane? Maybe, maybe not. Oh, sorry, I have to introduce the next. So, Sarah Menefee, are you here? Yeah. Sarah.
Wow. Happy birthday, Jack. Love never dies. Jack taught me everything I know that's worth knowing. So, what a privilege to have known him. And I'm I'm going to read a couple of little things I wrote, and then I'm going to read a couple of short ones of his. Movie. When you and I lived together poor and affectionately, you turned on the TV saying, maybe there will be a WC Fields movie on. And there was a one-time miracle. The fingers you count love on are infinitely numbered, and laughter waits nearby. Always a delight. Okay. Jack. I tried to describe your heart. It was too large. My mouth felt numb. It was as though I'd sighted a mythical creature so bright as to be disbelieved. There may be a place where hearts like yours are commonplace. I'm not from there. But you made this place a whole lot more like that, dear heart. Go to your broken heart. Yeah. And I'm Jack, oh God, what a blockbuster. I mean, he was poetry incarnate, and the Arcanes and his long, exquisite, but when he did his short little poems, it was all in there, profoundly and hugely. And here I'm just going to read a couple from Endless Threshold. I think that came out around 1992. So this one called Paiute Ant Pudding. You know, he used to go out to Pyramid Lake, which is on the Nevada desert, and it's a Paiute reservation. And he'd go skinny dipping in this warm water and lay on the sand. And he got a hold of a book at some point, which was the recipes for the traditional Paiute, you know, cuisine, what they get from the earth. And so this is a favorite of mine. Paiute ant pudding. They would go in deep night before the ants were awake with an empty sack and another with burning coals. They would stuff the branches where the ants were sleeping into the empty sack, scrape them down, and pour them into the sack with the burning coals. The legs and pinchers would come loose in the heat. Back in camp, they would empty the tiny bodies on a mat of leather, wash them clean with water, and with flour and hot water make a gravy, which would cool into a pudding by daybreak. 100 years later, this ant pudding can still rise off the ground or a modern table and fling itself at the face of any fucking Nazi. Okay, and so this is called Human Interlude for Terry Garvin. Everybody loved Jack, and you know what? The people on the street the most. He was no respecter of persons. He loved, well, you know him, so I don't need to say it. Human Interlude for Terry Garvin. She was standing against the wall near the Devorah Hotel, holding a plastic cup as it began to rain. I dug for a coin, walked up to her and dropped it in. It fell to the bottom of an orange drink. I blushed, looked into her ravaged eyes and skin and hair prematurely graying, and said, I was sorry. I thought she needed some bread. I do, she said, and smiled. I was just having a little drink. And we stood there laughing together as we watched the raindrops fall on the orange lake above the drowning money. Jack Hirschman, presente.
I love that poem too. We all do. I spotted Matt. Matt, you're here. Matt Gonzalez, please. And thank you, Sarah.
So great to see everybody here. Hey, Neeli. In 2002, I started working on a little sort of biographical chronology with Jack. And we were just looking at a lot of things, kind of going over his life, publications and things he had done. And in the course of doing that, I ran across the introduction to his first book of poetry. The book is titled A Correspondence of Americans. It was published by Indiana University in Bloomington in 1960. And what really struck me about this introduction, it was written by Carl Shapiro, is that 60 plus years later, it still holds up for really getting what Jack tried to do his entire career. He was really trying to break out of the academic language and kind of bring poetry back into more of a common speech. Carl Shapiro was a Pulitzer Prize winner. He had been the poet laureate at the Library of Congress. So it was, I'm sure, a very distinguished thing for Jack to get this introduction. And Jack was at the time getting a master's and PhD in Indiana, and Shapiro was teaching there. Carl Shapiro writes, Jack Hirschman takes the forms as they come, whether the meters or the meanings. He takes them or leaves them. He uses American as it strikes him, as it probably is, with rich, Baroque, guttural, learned, or New Yorkese, bombastic or tender, with the full gamut of the comedy of our unbelievable, impossible heritage. He is neither ashamed of what he knows nor carried away by it. He is natural. What a relief to find a poet who is not afraid of the vulgar or the sentimental, who can burst out laughing or crying his head off in poetry, who can make love to language or kick it in the pants. There's a poem, yeah, I think that he's right on. I'm going to read my favorite poem by Jack. It was published by the Zora Gallery in 1964. It's called Two, T-W-O. Two, in the beginning, I was soused with words. The page wasn't wide enough to hold my spillover. I ran, and the puns in brash brandy flew out of my mouth, slant rhymed. In time, I looked at her. The lines broke. Look at mine, look at hers, and neither died of it. That Irishman, they say, sang best at 77. It isn't easy to write the word love and mean it to be spoken. Now, there was Lisa Dolby Chadwick is here at her gallery just a few years ago. There was a pairing of that poem with an art piece that I had made. And in preparation for today, I ran across that I had the recording of Jack reading this poem. So I want you to hear the real version. All right, here we go. It's two. Stout with words. The page wasn't wide enough to hold my fill. I remember the pines and brandy flew out of my mouth, started running. In time, I looked at her. The line broke.
Look at mom. Look at her. And I that died. I would say, saying this, 77. It isn't easy to write the word love and mean it to be spoken.
There you go. And finally, I'm just going to end with something Jack wrote and spoke at the Poet Laureate acceptance speech in 2006. I read it at a Washington Square Park memorial that we did for Jack a few years ago, 2.5 years ago now. But I think it's such a great expression of what he believed he was doing in poetry and what poetry represented for him. And because it's in his own words and we're gathered here for him, I think it's appropriate. So Jack says, I said that I believe that everyone is a poet and that one of the central reasons that I fought as a revolutionary is to change not only the material conditions of mankind, but in so doing to liberate that idea that everyone here is a poet and a human consciousness. Why? Because language is indeed the house of being, and its most concentrated expression is poetry. And poetry is a truth of being, and that truth, which I call the most powerful thing in human expression, is precisely so, because it defies and deconstructs power, because its own power resides in its expression of the end of power through the verbal and rhythmic adventure of listening, not only to what calls from within, but to the inwardness of material things in being outwardly in motion, which not only live anew in their being named, but in their newness, in their being re-begun. For the truth of beginning is all that being is as well, also reveal to the poet their innermost secrets, so that he might show the way to the light of the heart in the dark times of chaos and extreme psychic estrangement. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you very much. Scott, Scott is going to sing one of Jack's Arcanes.
The summer before Jack passed away, I was working on a trilogy of poems set to music for him. Two of them were ones that he recited a lot, Gerard Manley Hopkins' The Windover and William Butler Yeats' Sailing to Byzantium. And then I set the third movement of Jack's Grit Arcane to music, which I'll play for you now. Now, chair, I will climb up into you as one climbs a tree and be done with competition. I am old, I am young, I have been schools, I have been streets, and the web of hardened Metallica, and the playback, and the fast forward, I have been graffiti. I have told why nothing is not zero. Why a woman's hips are red, why the squirrel brings me nuts. I have sucked my thumb as all good shamans. I have banged my spoon and dribbled diverse things. My fingers played the world on its new piano. The mouse ran up the clock all was money. Now, chair, I will lie across your lap at twilight and fiddle with my hair and wonder at all this flickering, because a woman is never still. I have been a traveler, the river at sundown is deep. I've been a beacon, I have been grit. Now, chair, I thin. I am written, I am drawn. I leave a line in the night sky, a streak of fire, an instant dint, then go out, go dark, go into, and all is light.
So can you play that again? It's my favorite. It's one of my favorite poems of Jack, The Great Arcane. And it's like a lullaby. Puts you gently to sleep. So please, devorah major.
Hello, everybody. I was thinking, when did I meet Jack? I just, you have to go. And well, for me, it was a long way back. So it was either 1979 or 1980. And Jack had a lot of kinds of courage. A lot of people don't. I was teaching a Black Writers Workshop in Fillmore. And it was the open reading night. And in comes this crazy white guy passing out these Russian, when he was doing the little Russian flyers, right? All of them, right? And the Black poets are there like, devorah, who's this guy? I don't know, but so we all read poetry. And he said, do you mind if I read a poem? I said, no, go for it. It's open reading. And then he was back the next week. You don't have to admit it, but y'all don't come to Fillmore and read Black Writers Workshops, okay? Very few white people do. I love Jack's memorial because it was some of all of us. And by all of us, I mean the world's people, not just people of European descent. And it was really affirming of the Jack I knew. And so Jack and I ended up becoming friends. It was like he was a poet friend and he just showed up. And I was like, this is really unusual in San Francisco. People in North Beach stay in North Beach, especially white people in North Beach stay in North Beach. What is he doing down in Fillmore? And he just kept coming back. And in fact, that was how I met Wanda Coleman. I knew her work, but I didn't know her. And he said, do you know Wanda Coleman? I said, no, I don't know Wanda Coleman, but I know her work. He said, I'll bring her by because she's going to be. And he brought her to the open reading. I'm like, this is cool. So that was Jack for me, a person of the world. And I think that everyone needs to work harder to be that if you're not that already. It's not just about your politics. It's really about how you live your life. And if when you pass, the world isn't there, you didn't live your life correctly, if you live in a city like San Francisco, Arcane for Jack. On the day Jack died, there were words. Furious, fated, fecund, failing words poured from the poets because they knew what Jack would do on such solemn occasions. He would write into the sunset, slit open the dawn, right through the heat of the afternoon, as the moon secreted itself behind thick clouds. Inside the starless night, he would right. He would hold a person in his heart and embody their fulsome laugh, their once powerful stride, the rolling rhythms of their voice, the insistent uprisings in their soul. So they wrote their poems, and riots grew from the syllables, and the deepest of sadness wrung inside the death. Personal and pervasive poems rocked and swam through salty tears as the poets gasped and didn't know what to do without their beacon, who pointed towards change without their alarm, who demanded action. So they wrote as Jack did around the planet in sun-scorched alleys and sandy ocean shores, as the fog pushed into evening, as the moon hovered over the night, they wrote to resurrect Jack, to have him live again and forever. They wrote his revolutionary love of humanity, compelling love of both of his children, the one who breathes and the one who crossed over too soon. They wrote for his passionate love for his wife, his enduring love for the planet, his insatiable love for justice. What can we do? They cried and beat on their chest. Who will carry this flag? Who will drum these drums? Who will we argue with and debate? Who will show us how to be consumed by language, decode their secrets and swallow their discord? In their fog of sadness, they wrote, as Jack would do. They wrote, seeped in compassion, praying for resolution, draped in color vibrations and sound symphonies, and then waited for him to rise again. But it was the words that rose, that formed and reformed themselves, that rebelled and castigated, that soothed and surrounded, that melted and bubbled, that became sweet and harsh, vodka laced and tobacco spat. A history of words ambling in second line struts on Columbus Street, over Grant, perching on the corner near Cafe Trieste, lounging between blades of grass in Washington Square Park. Words were leaping and squabbling. They were shrieking and shouting. They were coughing on cobblestone streets in Varanasi. They were aching in railroad tracks in Rome. They were chatting in London's underground. They were dancing in Medellin. They were sobbing in Paris. Confused, they scrambled up steep staircases into overstuffed drawers, looking for a pen, a journal, a scrap of paper, a newspaper margin. The words were in rebellion and began to scream, to screech, to surrender, to serenade. Jack Hirschman, presente. Jack Hirschman, presente. Jack Hirschman, presente.
I keep forgetting my role. I'm just getting so involved with that. That poem just moves me deeply. It is exactly how it was. And Devorah wrote that the very morning when you learned it, if I recall correctly. So I'm going to call up Jessica. Have you got a poem to read? Yeah. Jessica Lewis.
This is a poem of Jack's called The House of the Setting Sun, and it's from his book, All That's Left. And it starts with a quotation from Pier Paolo Pasolini from his poem To the Red Flag. Become a rag again, and the poorest may wave you. The house of the setting sun. I put my mouth to your misery, New Orleans, inundated and scaling with death. Here lies, war lies pled so high, this floating prison of a cemetery cries out of rage at the end of its breath. Here, in the last delta, desire lies on its side, is rolled and rolled over upon its own government and crushed. Summertime is over and the living is dead, and round midnight all hopes are looted. No one will come clean off the Katrina. of New Orleans in the sinking house of the setting sun. Bodies so black and so blue from loving that what wouldn't spit on their shoes if they needed to shine, let alone a dime or water. America, you were always scorched earth in our mouths, always a baptism of crap, always a rain of disaster streaming down the panes of our broken eyes. Now our rags are the most torn, our jazz the most blue, our poor the poorest that can be worn in the soul's thrift shop. Now that all is lost and there's only nothing to lose, long live the courage and the sorrow and the innocence of the poor. The real flags in tatters begin to wave it.
That's another poem I absolutely love. Thank you, Jessica, for reading this. Before I'm going to call up Alejandro Murguia, it's a message from Amber Tamblyn, who would have liked to have been here today, but she couldn't make it. So here it is. Here's what I wrote for Jack. Happy birthday to the greatest. In the morning, I wake up and look out of the window on my Brooklyn home, and Jack is there, walking down the trash-cluttered street, his red scarf thrown over his shoulder, a book under his arm as he says hello to those who pass him. Good morning, friend, I say through the glass. In the morning winter wind, his voice whispers through the leafless trees, falling on the branches to dance despite all the darkness. And in bookstores, his voice thunders through every shelf as I run a finger over the many spines that bear his name. When a protest finds its way down my block, and I feel in the power of a movement in movement, Jack is there among them. When an unhoused man asks me for some spare change on Atlantic Avenue, it is Jack I hear in my head saying, if you don't have the money to give, then give him dignity. Don't ignore, don't look away. Share a smile or a hello if you can. Don't let him feel invisible, even just for a moment, in a world that has erased him. When I drink the strongest cup of coffee I can find, it is with Jack's lips. And walking over the Brooklyn Bridge at dusk, that winter dusk that comes too early and stays too long, I see a couple dancing, smiling, twirling in the freezing evening, despite themselves. Jack is the music they hear. When I tuck my daughter into sleep at night, I sing her his favorite song. Good night, Ivory, you know. And when I close my eyes to rest my head before sleep, I see him there in the blue behind my eyelids. As Lucinda Williams would say, I see him there, a smile that could crack me wide open, his arms outstretched wide to hold me once again, to hold the hurting, broken world once again. Jack is still everywhere in the way we love, in the way we fight, in the way we mourn, celebrate and write. Lunga vita, Jack Hirschman, the people's poet and mine. Thank you, Amber. So Alejandro Murguia.
Well, thank you all very much for joining us tonight to celebrate a unique poet and a unique personality of San Francisco and perhaps the world. So I want to take a moment to thank Stacy and Elaine and all the folks at City Lights and Agneta and all the poets that showed up for taking time off from your busy lives to be here tonight. So, you know, this reading is a little bit too somber for me. So when we go to specs, the drinks are on me. as long as they take Mexican pesos. So I just want to remember one thing about how complex a man and a poet and a writer Jack is and was. I don't know if everybody remembers that period in his life. I don't know, it went on for years and years and years, where every day he would write 3 poems in Russian. In Russian, yes? Amazing, right? I can't write 3 poems a day in English, right? So, and so he had a wide range, I think, of his taste and his approaches to poetry. So since somebody mentioned, I think it was Scott, Sailing to Byzantium, which was Jack's all-time favorite poem and one of the handful of poems that he could recite, because he said it was the perfect metaphor and the best poem he had ever known of about poetry. And it just so happens that I have it on me. Let's see how it works. The last time I tried this, I pulled out a parking ticket. And William Butler Yeats, Sailing to Byzantium. You want to play some music, Scott? You can do the chorus. That is no country for old men. The young in one another's arms, birds in the trees, those dying generations at their song. The salmon falls, the mackerel crowded seas, fish, flesh or fowl commend all summer long, whatever is begotten, born and dies, caught in that sensual music all neglect, monuments of unaging intellect. An aged man is but a paltry thing, a tattered coat upon a stick, unless soul claps its hands and sing, and louder sing for every tatter in its mortal dress, nor is there singing school but studying monuments of its own magnificence. And therefore I have sailed the seas and come to the holy city of Byzantium. O sages standing in God's holy fire, as in the gold mosaic of a wall, come from the holy fire, Perne in a gyre, and be the singing masters of my soul. Consume my heart away, sick with desire, and fastened to a dying animal, it knows not what it is, and gather me into the artifice of eternity. Once out of nature, I shall never take my bodily form from any natural thing, but such a form as Grecian goldsmiths make of hammered gold and gold enameling to keep a drowsy emperor awake, or set upon a golden bough to sing to lords and ladies of Byzantium of what is past or passing or to come. Yeah. Jack Hirschman is channeled through William Butler Yeats and Alejandro Murguia. So just briefly, so I met Jack through his translation work back in 1973 or so. I think it was in City Lights down in the poetry room. I came upon this book that I still consider one of the great poems of the Americas by the Martinique poet René Depestre, and it was translated by Jack from the French, one of the great classics, A Rainbow for the Christian West, an exorcism, a chant to exorcise the racism of the Southern class of the United States. Very powerful poem, and that's how I was introduced to Jack's work. Actually, I shouldn't tell this story, but I will. When I was a very young brown buffalo, in Los Angeles before arriving in San Francisco, about 19 years old. I picked up an anthology of Victorian pornography called The Yellow Book. And the introduction was by Jack Hirschman, PhD. And I thought it was the strangest thing that somebody put a PhD in a pornography anthology, right? And years later, when I got to know Jack, right, I asked him about that. Jack, that you? Is that you? He says, yes. And the reason he did it, when he got expelled from UCLA, right, over the Vietnam War and him giving draft status to students and stuff, he said he wanted to drag the PhD through the mud. That's my friend Jack Hirschman. And later on, I think an important period during Jack's time in the late 70s, early 80s, when the wars were going on in Central America, and he became involved with the Roque Dalton Cultural Brigade and was introduced to the poets of Central America, including published by City Lights in the Volcan anthology, the very first anthology edited with Barbara Paschke and myself. And he was introduced to the great writers of Central America, like Otto Rene Castillo, Daisy Zamora, but in particular, Roque Dalton, yes, that became like Jack's most favorite poet of all time. And Jack was also instrumental in introducing Roque's work in Italy, right? So this is, I'll only read the translation, Jack's translation of this poem, that Jack considered the single best poem of the 20th century. Yes? And it is by the great Salvadoran poet, Roque Dalton. And this is Jack's translation that appears in the anthology Volcan, published by City Lights. Act by Roque Dalton. In the name of those washing others' clothes and expelling others' filth from the whiteness, in the name of those caring for others' kids and selling their strength in the form of maternal love and humiliations, in the name of those living in another's house, which isn't even an amiable womb, but a tomb or jail, in the name of those eating others' crumbs and chewing them in fact, with a feeling of a thief, in the name of those living on others' lands, the houses and factories and shops, streets, cities and towns, rivers, lakes, volcanoes and mountains, always belonging to others. And that's why the cops and the guards are there guarding them against us. In the name of those who have nothing but hunger, exploitation, disease, a thirst for justice and water, persecutions and condemnations, loneliness, abandonment, oppression, death. I accuse private property of depriving us of everything.
Thank you. I could hear Jack's voice booming there. Boom,
Jack
boom.
Hirschman,
Presenter. I heard his voice through your voice. You got that? Okay. Yeah. So it's penultimate poet for tonight. And then we are going to close with something, a beautiful surprise. So Mauro Ffortissimo, per favor.
Jack was a golden being. Unfortunately, nothing gold can stay. Nature's first green is gold, her hardest hue to hold. Her early leaf is a flower, but only for an hour. Then leaf subside to leaf. So Eden sank to grief. So dawn goes down today. Nothing gold can stay. That was overfroze. And this is one from Jack Hirschman. There is a happiness, a joy in one soul that's been very alive in everyone and forgotten. It isn't in your barroom joke or tender, intimate humor or affections of friendliness or big bright pun. They are the surviving survivors of what happened when happiness was very alive, when it no longer looked out of today's eyes and doesn't even manifest when one of us dies. We just walk away from everything, alone with what is left of us, going on being human beings without being human, without a happiness. Thank you.
Thank you, Mauro. It's another beautiful poem of Jack's. So I'm going to read a poem I wrote for Jack many years ago when he was 70, but it's a birthday poem, so I'm going to read, I added a line or two because I couldn't think of a better poem to read because it's his birthday. But we're going to finish the evening. And I also want to thank everyone for coming because we are going to finish the evening with George Long playing one of the songs so deeply associated with Jack. And I'm going to read birthday poem for Jack. So it started with For Your Breath, 70 years of it, but I changed that. For your breath, all years of it, a kiss on your silver hair, every strand. I want you to know before I run out of breath, before I put candles in my hair, that the lines on your face, deep and playful, light and thoughtful, tug at my heart, like an old poem falling on new ink, cutting through the humdrum, sweet spark angels of Zim Zoom. Giant brush in your hand splashes across the room onto the world's canvas and my clothes. Pollock's Little Children, strange how it goes this song, lullabying itself in and out of your mouth, not quite knowing what will come next, but absolutely sure it has no other intent than to be in this moment. When the day's book closes, the night opens another one, a crackling sound at dawn. Zubul kib fimbul zobriba kibafuba skapatalabum. I take this to mean roughly the revolution is on its way. And that's the way it is with you. Foot and heart into the fire, the world's oldest newsboy, the world's young spirit, fearless and kind, the best hugger in town to all. Forgotten voices in your pen, bursting out, bursting through in cascading cadences. Oh, happiness, your face in the morning. Oh, happiness, sorry, this is difficult. Oh, happiness, your hand on my back. Your freshly cut words tumbling out, a giant rainbow. Bending across the world, your smile, seeing it every day, such joy, and now the moment of conception, you can't but say Kodesho. And that light out there is her, the girl with candles in her hair, Sancta Lucia, and everyone with her, wishing you happy birthday, wherever you are, forever, beloved light. Should I read it in past tense? So, George Long.
This is not You Are My Sunshine. One of Jack's favorites. It won't be You Are My Sunshine.
You're very welcome to step across the road for some refreshment.
Thank you everyone for coming. It's been a treat having you all here and celebrating Jack. Thank you. We'll see you at Specs.